Hijab symbolizes power to women, not inferiority.
My name is Samane, and this is the story of the head covering worn by Muslim women known as the hijab. I was born in a country in the Middle East, and now I live in Vancouver, Canada. A few years after arriving in Canada, I stopped wearing the hijab, but I know and admit that the hijab is more than a piece of cloth on one's head. Although I still do not wear the hijab, the concept of hijab has always stayed with me. In many Western countries, most recently the Canadian province of Quebec, the subject of hijab is highly controversial. Under the guise of defending secularism, the piece of cloth, which is sacred to many, has become the subject of political controversy and party politics. I am not a political person, and I resist very abstract academic thinking, but I did want to understand and learn more about hijab. I wore the hijab for the period of my research, and I engaged myself in conversations with 4 Muslim women with different takes and experiences with hijab. Nadia is an immigration consultant who wears hijab occasionally, but does not believe in hijab as an essential part of her faith.
In my immediate family, none of us really wear the hijab. My mother doesn't wear the hijab, nor does my younger sister.
Dina is the reverse. An immigrant from Egypt, she works for a non-profit fundraising support organization. She practices hijab in full.
It seemed like the natural step. I was going to do it eventually. That's what I was raised to think. And I even wore it before I should.
Majida, raised in Canada, is an ambitious grade 12 student. She grew up with hijab in Canada and at times gives public lectures on hijab.
I did start wearing it at the age of 9, but it wasn't really because it was like my personal choice. It was because everyone else was doing it and it was just a good thing to do. But I think as soon as I started reaching high school, it was kind of society was going against me, and that's when I first started to learn about myself and what my morals were and what I wanted to do, who I wanted to be. And I think hijab was one of the things that helped me understand who I was as a person.
And Razma is a second-year university student who never wore the hijab during her childhood, but has recently developed new relations with this Muslim female dress.
Now when I think of hijab, I think of modesty, beauty, and strength. Before, when I didn't wear a hijab, I thought of oppression, terrorism, something I would never, ever do. I would even tell my friends, I would never be caught dead wearing a hijab, and I quote that. That's exactly what I say every single time. And now look at me, I'm representing it well, I think.
I also visited Eva Saju at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver for her insights on the Canadian Muslim experiences with hijab and also its historical point of origin.
In a lot of Western countries, there's this strange idea that head covering is a Muslim thing. In fact, the roots of head covering go far, far beyond Islam. Muslims did not invent the head covering. Like most practices, it has both religious and cultural origins. So the religious point of origin is that there is a verse in the Quran which instructs women to drape a covering over their bosoms and generally to dress modestly. And this has been interpreted by many Muslims to involve covering the head. Why? Because at the time, there were women in the prevailing culture, not Muslims, particularly Byzantine women, who customarily covered their heads. It was a sign of status. Working women in the fields didn't do it. Wealthy women who could afford to did. And so the sense that covering one's head was an attractive thing to do and an appropriate expression of modesty and perhaps of status became quite popular. Now, this practice has often continued outside of Muslim societies as well. You can still find it in Spain, where a traditional dress for women involves a black sort of shawl covering over the head. It's common in conservative Jewish traditions for women to cover their heads with a scarf or with a wig. And of course, there are Catholic and Orthodox nuns who habitually wear not just a head covering, but in fact a full body drape. So the sense that it's some strangely Muslim idea is quite an erroneous concept, really.
In the West, however, females covering their heads in public is a practice exclusive to Muslim women. On the outside, the way Muslim women wear their hijab looks very similar. But in fact, there are a variety of motives drawing Muslim women to wear the hijab.
A great variety of reasons why women are increasingly choosing to wear the hijab in some parts of the world. One of them is, of course, religion, that there are women who sincerely believe that covering the head is a requirement of Islam, and they're doing it as an expression of their faith and as piety.
The first thing that comes to my mind when I hear the word hijab is a Muslim woman or Islam. The reason why I wanted to wear hijab is that I knew for sure that my religion said that explicitly, or the people that I trust who interpreted the verse believed so. So this is why it felt natural. I wanted to do it eventually, so why not now?
Then there is the cultural reason. There are some women who have grown up in places where this is what women do, and so it's part of a larger group identity. So a rural woman from some parts of Nigeria, for example, who grew up with the veil, everyone in the village wears it.
For me, I've never used the hijab personally as a statement to express myself, because that's not how I express myself. I've used it as a means to be respectful to the environment and the culture that I'm in.
Then, of course, there are the political reasons, and this perhaps is the most interesting factor and responsible for the uptick in the number of women wearing the hijab. And this has two tracks. One of them has to do with globalization, with the spread of images, both of a certain Western secular version of modernity, and also with a movement that resists that image. And in this sense, the hijab is an expression of difference. It's an expression of an identity that doesn't fit into the mass spread Western modern model.
What comes to my mind when I think about hijab is liberation. I feel like it liberates me from a society that's constantly trying to put down women for trying to be who they are and for trying to cover up.
And then, of course, in terms of politics, it's impossible to ignore the effect of September 11th. What September 11th did was to dramatically heighten tensions and negative images of Muslims, particularly in the United States, but also in many countries in the Western world. In America in particular, attacks on Muslims went up 1,600% after 9/11. Now, in this context, there were some women who didn't wear hijab before who decided to put it on. And it was an expression of making one's Muslim identity visible.
I was someone who would never, ever wear hijab. And ever since 9/11, these terrorist attacks and whatnot, I've thought that, wow, this is not what Islam stands for. I'm someone who likes my religion enough to still be a Muslim. But do I want to take the next step in being a representative, almost like an ambassador of Islam? How can I do that? How can I be someone who shows Islam because without wearing hijab, no one's going to know I'm Muslim. So with a hijab, they'll be like, hey, she's Muslim. Hey, she's a good person. Wow, doesn't look like she's going to blow up any second now, you know? So yeah, I've been thinking about it. And then one day I'm like, Mom, what do you think about hijab? And she's like, well, I don't know. Like, she kind of like had a little smile inside. She's like, is my daughter thinking about this? So I've been thinking about it, and then I went home and I thought about it, and right the next day I'm like, you know what, I'm just gonna do it. I never thought about it, I'm just gonna do it. And my sisters were all like, are you crazy? You know, like none of them wore hijab. And they're like, you know, it's a lot of responsibility, pressure, you're in high school, you're in the middle of grade 10, what are you doing? But I just did it, and I wanted to represent Islam the best that I could.